Hey guys, I've been a challenger player for the last 4 sets, and I'm not going to waste your time in this video and give you the generic advice that you've probably heard of already. There are a ton of videos out there on comp guides and tier lists with people blindly following them, but I think that what a lot of people fail to realize is that you could memorize every single comp in the game, but if you have shitty fundamentals, you are still going to be trash. This video is going to be my practical, non-BS guide on TFT, and if you're actually able to make it to the end of this video, I promise you that you are going to climb infinite. The first fundamental I'll be covering in this video is going to be Econ. If you were to take only one thing from this video, it would be Econ, because even if all your other fundamentals are trash, this skill alone will be able to get you to diamond. So there are two main ideas of Econ. The first idea is that gold is a lot more valuable early game than late game. For example, at stage 2-1, if you manage to hit the 10 gold interval, you make 1 gold. That 1 gold is not actually worth 1 gold. Because of how compound interest works, that 1 gold will eventually become at least 4 to 6 gold by stage 5. The second main idea is that streaking gives you up to 3 gold per round. So if you're familiar with the very basics of Econ, you know that you get up to 5 gold for interest. But if you're not playing around win streaking, you probably are only playing around 70% of your potential gold that you could earn. And considering that interest compounds, if you're not lose streaking early, you are missing out on probably 40 gold late game. Here I listed some important breakpoints that you should follow. Basically, at each of these stages, these are good checkpoints for how much gold you should have. And if you don't have that much gold on each of these stages, you are probably doing something wrong. So there are always going to be a few questions you should generally be asking yourself when you're thinking about leveling. One question is, how much eco will I lose for leveling? So let's just take an example where you're at stage 3-5, you're level 6 with 50 gold, and you're on a 5 win streak. You have the option of pushing level 7, but you'll go down to 20 gold. And the question is, how much eco will I lose for this play? Well, if we go down to 20 gold, we'll be at 20. So we'll lose 3 gold for 1 turn, and then we'll make 30, we'll lose 2 gold, and then we'll make 40, we'll lose 1 gold, and then finally at the next interval we'll be able to make 50 again, so we'll lose about 6 gold in total. However, if the act of you pushing level 7 here allows you to win a fight that you wouldn't have won if you were level 6, you would actually make all the money you would have lost back because of win streaking. If you're on a 5 win streak, you get an extra 3 gold per turn. So here, this would be a +3, here would be a +3 again, and here would be a +3 again, essentially earning you money if you push level here instead of going down to a lower econ interval. So the second question is, how does leveling play into my game plan of streaking? Well, we already talked about win streaking, but what do we do if we're lose streaking? And let me give you an example. Let's say we start the game at stage 2-1 with a shit augment, no slammable items, and no upgrades. We go into stage 2-6 on a 4 lose streak, and we decide to level here. What could potentially end up happening is that you win the 5th round by accident. And if that happens, at that point, you might as well just open FF the game. The reason why is because if you win this 5th round, you're going to go into stage 3-2, you're going to have no HP, you're going to have a shit board, and you're going to be broke. Whereas if you just force this 5th loss, you'll at least be able to roll more on stage 3-2 to have a chance of coming back. So the third question is going to be, how will the shop odds change if I level? And a very good example I could give you is at stage 2-1, let's say you're contemplating on whether you should push level 4 or not, and you're holding 4 1-cost pairs on your bench. Basically, the play here is to almost never level here, because if you decide to level, you're dramatically decreasing the chances of you hitting a stronger board. And the reason why is because when you push from level 3 to 4, if we look at the 1-cost unit probabilities, the chances of hitting a 1-cost unit at level 3 is 75%. But if you push level 4, it goes down to 55%, which dramatically worsens your next shop of making your board stronger. So the last point is, how does leveling or rolling affect my future leveling intervals? And this point is just mainly about having a little bit of extra foresight into how the game will play out, which will impact the way you play. For example, let's say I'm forced to roll down on stage 3-2 and stage 4-1. Based on that information, I already know that I won't be able to push 8 this game, so my playstyle for this game is to just play for top 4. I'm just going to donkey roll every single turn until I'm 0 gold at stage 4 to cut the bleeding and hope I get a 5th and leave. So now I'm actually going to get into when exactly you should level and what you should be thinking about. So when you start the game at stage 2-1, you generally want to develop a game plan first, and before that you need to do an evaluation of your current situation. You look at your augments, items, bench, and the lobby, and decide if you want to play for a win streak or lose streak. So let's say you have an upgraded board, decent augments, slammable items. You probably want to level here and push for the streak. If you don't have any upgraded units, shit items, weak augment, you probably want to 5 lose into Krugs, prioritize every single econ interval, and then roll down at stage 3-2. So the gray area is if you have a relatively the average board. If you're holding a lot of 1-cost pairs, the play is probably to stay at level 3 because you would have the highest chance of spiking your board by hitting these pairs. If you can make the 10 gold threshold, you probably want to stay level 3 as well because again, this would be equivalent to around 3 rolls late game. But I would say that if you think you could save a lot of HP from leveling, then you could push level 4. There is the situation where you have a 1-cost reroll comp opener. In that case, you would just 5 loose into Krugs and then slow roll above 50 gold at level 5. So after the first carousel, you always want to reevaluate your position. You look at your board again and decide whether or not you could play for win streak or lose streak. So here, if your board is decent, even if you had 3 loses, you could just play strongest board into stage 3-2 because it will just save you a lot of HP. But if your board is still shit, please force the 5 loose into Krugs because if you win this round by accident, it's just an 8th. You're broke, you have no money, you can't do anything on stage 3-2. There's no way you could come back. So at stage 3-2, you always level to 6 here. The exception is if you're playing a reroll comp. And here you want to do another evaluation. How much HP am I? If your HP is relatively low and your board is shit, you have to roll down until 10 or 20 gold here, or else you're just going to bleed out and take your free 8th. If your board is actually strong, you could afford to greed a little bit and greed to level 7 and then play for the level 7 roll down. And another situation is, what if I have a weak board but I'm pretty healthy? Well, I think this point in particular highly depends on what the meta is like. For example, in the current meta, it's a very high tempo meta because a lot of reroll comps spike at level 6 or 7. And even if you're relatively healthy, if your board is shit, you're going to take 40 damage for free if you don't roll down here and stabilize your board. But if it's a low tempo lobby and everyone's greeting to fast 8, then you could probably afford to greed a bit and go 8. For 1, it's the next stage breakpoint. You basically almost always level to 7 here and reevaluate your position again. Here is the stage where you usually need to make the decision on whether you want to play for top 4 or the win out. The top 4 play here is to just roll down until your board is stable and you can win rounds. The win out play is to just slight roll until you could cut the bleeding and try to push 8 on stage 4-5. Finally, on stage 4-5, this is pretty simple. You go 8 here if you didn't roll much at 3-2 at 4-1. You roll here because everyone spikes here and you need to cut the bleeding. And finally, at stage 5-1, this is the point where you roll if you ended up having to roll at stage 3-2 and 4-1. And here, you make the decision if you have to play for top 4 or first again. Basically, if you want to play for first, you need to go 9, so you only want to slight roll until your board is stable. You want to econ back up all the way until you could go level 9, and that's usually around stage 6-2. And if you make the evaluation and you probably could only play the top 4, you just donkey roll every single turn to cut the bleeding and then just hope you get a 3rd or 4th. And if you're wondering where to get this document, I'm going to link this document in the comments below, so if you ever want to reference this document when you play your games, you'll have access to it. So the next fundamental I'll be talking about is knowing how to play your strongest board. So let's say I have a Nasus, Galio, and Sivir all 1-starred, and in a second board I have a 1-star Blitz, Poppy, and Ashe with no synergies. Which board do you think is stronger? You would probably come to the conclusion that this is the stronger board, and you would be right. Now, what if I told you that the Poppy and the Ashe were now 2-starred? Now, you have to ask yourself, okay, are the raw stats of these upgraded units more valuable than these synergies on my 3 1-star units? You'll come to the conclusion that this upgraded board is now stronger. But now, what if I told you that this Nasus was 2-star as well? You could see how it could already get a little bit confusing with just 3 units. Imagine how confusing it will get if you're level 9 with 9 units on bench, and 7 different items you need to juggle. So there are a few key ideas to playing your strongest board. The first idea is that a higher cost unit is generally better than a lower cost one. So for example, a Vi is better than a Blitz, a Senna is better than a Sivir, but a Galio might sometimes be better than the Malphite just because it's a civilian. So for example, if your team comp was AP heavy and you had Ludens, the Galio would be better because it would enable your team to cast more, making your team stronger overall. So the next rule is that a higher star unit is generally better than a lower star one. So for example, even though Vi is the higher cost unit, if the Renekton is 2-star, the Renekton will be stronger than the Vi, and similarly the Gangplank will be stronger than the Yasuo. But again, this rule does not always apply because it highly depends on the unit itself. Jinx right now is a terrible unit, and even if the Jinx is 2-starred, having a 1-star Kai'Sa will probably still be stronger than the Jinx. So point number 3, synergies are more valuable on better units. So for example, here we have a 2 brawler synergy on a Blitzcrank and a Renekton. This is still going to be a worse frontline than a 2-star Nasus and a 2-star Poppy, because the raw stats of these upgraded units are going to be more HP than the brawler synergy will give these 2 shitters. So point number 4, items are generally more valuable on higher impact units than lower impact ones. So for example, if I had a 1-star Renekton and a 1-star Vi, I would probably want to put the Sunfire cape on the Vi because she's the better unit, she will live longer, and she will apply Sunfire longer. But let's say that I had these 2 units and Renekton already had a Warmogs on him. The Sunfire would actually be better on the Renekton because you already have the extra base health on him. It will enable the Sunfire to have more value on the Renekton than the Vi. Similarly, if I had a 1-cost Samira and a 1-star Senna, Senna, you want the items on the Samira because she's the stronger unit. But if Senna was 2-star, then you would want the items on the Senna instead, because a 2-star Senna is stronger than a 1-star Samira. However, these cases don't always apply. For example, let's say I had a 2-star Annie and a 1-star Talon, and you had the choice to put Ionic Spark on either your Annie or your Talon. Sometimes it's actually better to put the Spark on the Talon, because if you're playing Talon, you have backline access, and what ends up happening is Talon goes on their carry and just barely misses finishing them off. The Spark will basically shred their backline's magic resist, enabling Talon to get the finishing blow, which will in turn give your team more value because you assassinate their carry at the beginning of the fight. So the last point is going to be having an even distribution of frontline and backline. So for example, in this board, I have 4 brawlers in. This board is trash, but if I have Sunfire Cape, then this board is broken, because Sunfire Cape gives my team the damage that it doesn't have. And similarly, in this second board, although I have 4 Recon in, which is a crazy good offensive synergy, because I have no frontline, my team is just going to get run over anyway, so this board is not that good either. If I just remove 2 of my shitter Recon units and just played an actual frontline, my backline will end up actually doing more damage simply due to the fact that they will survive longer. So the final fundamental that I will be covering is going to be itemization. And I think that a lot of new players, when they think about itemization, they think, okay, I need X, Y, and Z for best in slot Z, X, Y, and Z for best in slot Samira. That's not the way you should be thinking about items. The way you should be thinking about it is, how can I get the most value out of each of my components? And there are 3 main concepts to this, but before I get into these concepts, I think it's extremely important that you understand this base knowledge first. So you are guaranteed a minimum of 12 item components per game. 4 of them are going to be controlled and 8 of them are going to be uncontrolled. This means that if you currently have 8 item components and you're going into the last creep round, you could safely assume that you're going to get dropped 4 more item components, so you should plan your game around that fact. Now, one big misconception is that these 8 item drops from creeps are completely random. They are random, but they are at the same time not completely random, and I'm going to show you why. So how item drops work in TFT is that each player has their own item pool. Whenever they get dropped an item from creeps, it basically takes that component out of the pool. So for example, let's say this is my item pool and I get dropped a belt. The belt gets removed from this item pool, so my chances of naturaling another belt are now lower. And this is why it's extremely rare for you to natural 3 of the same component, because if you natural a belt and later on you natural another belt, there is only 1 belt left in this pool, and the odds of you naturaling the last belt is extremely low. Now, this is not exactly how the item pool works. It's a simplified version of it, but TLDR, if you natural a bow, you are less likely to natural another bow later into the game because you already took 1 bow out of the pool. So now that you have this base knowledge, I'm finally going to get into the concepts. The first concept is playing around your potential item pool, and there's a lot of ways to do this. The first way is you get more value from slamming suboptimal items when you're win streaking, and the second point is you get more value from greeting for best in slot when you're lose streaking. So say for example, I have chain belt cloak. Depending on my next item, there are 2 possible item combinations I can make that are very strong: Sunfire Spark or Gargoyle's Warmogs. Depending on your board, one could be stronger than the other. For example, in a full bruiser board, this one might be better, but if you're playing a solo frontline like Annie, this combo might be better. Let's just say in this scenario, I'm playing the Annie. If you're win streaking, it's a lot better to slam the Sunfire because you're not guaranteed a rod or belt from Carousel. So say for example, you're win streaking and you greed, chances are because your last pick, you're going to end up with a component you don't want, and you're going to end up slamming the Sunfire 3 turns later anyway. So why not just do it now to make your board stronger and ensure you streak? However, if you're lose streaking, slamming the Sunfire will probably still not affect your fight. In that case, you would get more value from just greeting for best in slot because you're probably guaranteed the item you want from Carousel. In this case, you could just anticipate that you're going to get a belt because you have pick prio. In that case, you could greed, take the belt, and slam the Gargoyles and Warmogs later. And in this case, your components would be giving you more value if you slam Sunfire because this combination of items spikes your board harder. So the next point is going to be you should try to slam items that eliminate inflexible or excess components. So for example, let's say you're playing AP and you had belt, cloak, tier. What item would you go for off Carousel? The item you would want is going to be rod because it allows you to kill off your most inflexible component, which is your cloak. So the reason why this is important is because if you were playing around these 3 components and you were at Carousel, you have the lowest chance of naturaling an item component that allows you to make use of this cloak, whereas belt and tier could make so much different items that are good for AP. These 2 components just have so many more outs compared to the cloak. So it's a lot better for you to use Carousel to eliminate your shittiest component because playing around belt and tier is infinitely more flexible than playing around this cloak. And similarly for excess components, let's say you already had your Shiv, you already had your Giant Slayer, and you had bow, belt, I would just instantly slam a ZZ Rod because AP doesn't need that many bows, and you already have all the required bow items for AP. So the only way you can make use of this bow in another way is to use it as a frontline item instead. So you should slam items while keeping track of your natural versus carousel components. So let's say you noted that you naturaled the bow in the beginning of the game, but you haven't naturaled any swords yet. You want to itemize Samira, your current items are Runan's, Last Whisper, and you're going for GS. Do you go for a bow or a sword off carousel? And this is not 50-50. So remember when I was talking about the item pool earlier? Because you already naturaled a bow in the beginning of the game, it's less likely for you to natural a bow later. So the higher EV play in this case is to go for the bow off carousel and anticipate the sword. So the next concept is going to be item distribution, and basically what this means is that when you itemize your carry, you should not be tunneling on a single item that you want to make. You should be thinking of overall what is the best combination of items you could give to your carry. So for example, if you're trying to itemize your Talia and you have bow, swords here, a common beginner mistake is they're going to look up a guide on how to play Talia, and they're going to see that Shojin is recommended on almost every single guide. They build the Shojin, they're left with an RFC, and then they go buff 4. This second variation is infinitely stronger on your Talia than the first one, but you will only be able to realize this if you stop blindly following these comp guides. So the final concept for itemization is going to be multiplicative scaling, and this is the idea that your 3 items on your unit are all going to work together because they scale off each other's stats. This is the main reason why you always itemize your carry with 3 full items and your main tank with 3 full tank items. So here is an example of multiplicative scaling. You have a shitload of base HP, which further gets amplified by the extra armor and magic resist you get, and then your HP and resistances get even further amplified because you heal a percentage of your base HP every second. In this example, you're given a high amount of base HP from Death Cap, which further gets amplified by the ability to crit off your high base AP already. But here in this case, you're probably not going to cast a lot. How would you multiplicatively scale the damage of your AP unit? And the answer to that is to make your unit cast more often. So in that case, to make your unit stronger, you would just add a mana item like Shojin. I know this seems obvious at first, but this is a huge deal in deciding how you should itemize your unit. For example, let's say you were playing Talia with 5 Star Guardians. 5 Star Guardians already gives your Talia so much mana that you would get more value out of your Talia if you were to itemize her with a 3rd damage item instead, because she's already going to cast so often. So if you just itemize her with another multiplicative item like GS, she's going to do even more damage if you just put a Shojin on her. But let's say you were playing 4 Spellslinger and 3 Star Guardian. Because you're only playing 3 Star Guardian, you might need the extra mana to make her cast more often. If you notice, 4 Spellslinger gives your Talia infinite AP, so instead of having this death cap, you could just replace it with the Shojin instead, because in this case, you're lacking the extra mana. And this combination of items, if you're playing 4 Spellslinger instead of 5 Star Guardians, is going to make your Talia stronger due to how multiplicative scaling works. So this sums up my advanced TFT guide. A lot of the topics in this video were pretty complex, so I would recommend watching this video more than once if you don't currently get some of the ideas I explained in here. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel or follow me on Twitch, and I will see you guys next time.